Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, this is January 14th, 2012. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so we've been studying Sutta number 64 in the Majjhima Nikāya. This is the greater discourse to Malunkyaputta. And last time we took the first part of this sutta, which is concerned with the 5 lower fetters. If you remember, just to summarize what I covered last time. Buddhism speaks about 3 layers, or 3 realms of existence. The Buddhist picture of Buddhist cosmology, I have already. Okay, so we have these 3 realms of existence. The lowest realm is called sometimes the desire realm, or the realm of sensuality. And the human realm is, or human existence is within this realm. The hells, the animals, the tormented spirits, and even the desire realm, heavens, are within the desire realm. Then above the desire realm is the realm of subtle matter, or called the form realm. This is the realm where beings have eliminated sensual desire, but they still have, it's the realm in which the coarser forms of sensuality are not present, but they're still material form. And the beings in this realm spend most of their time absorbed in deep stages of meditation. And then above the form realm is the formless realm, in which matter has completely fallen away. There's just mind or consciousness, but it's still the realm of living beings, of sentient beings, beings without bodies, but still with mind and consciousness. And this is also a realm corresponding to very deep and subtle states of samadhi, of meditative absorption. Then what keeps, and these three realms together constitute samsara, the round of birth and death, the spheres of repeated becoming. And now what keeps us bound within samsara are certain factors, mental factors that the Buddhist texts call fetters, in Pali, sangyojana. And of the 10 fetters or 10 sangyojana, 5 of them are called the lower fetters, because these are the fetters that bind us to the realm of desire, the desire realm. And so these 5 lower fetters are, can anybody enumerate them without looking at notes? Yeah, that was what he missed. Okay, so the 5 lower fetters are identity view, which is a view of self, doubt, the wrong grasp of rules and observances, taking them to be the sufficient means to liberation, sensual desire or sensual craving, and ill will or anger. So as long as those 5 fetters remain intact, then we are capable of taking rebirth again and again within the desire realm. And now beyond the 5 lower fetters, there are also 5 subtle or higher fetters. And those fetters also occur within the desire realm. Don't think that they don't occur here. But it's possible to eliminate the 5 lower fetters, yet still retain the 5 higher fetters. The 5 higher fetters are, you say, attachment to form, which would mean basically that is either the attachment to the jhanic experiences, the experience of jhanic samadhi, and also the desire to be reborn within the form realm. Then there's the second is attachment to the formless. This will be a subtle attachment to the formless meditations and also the craving to be reborn in the formless realms of existence. Then there is conceit, which can be a very subtle conceit, even just the idea that I am something or somebody. Then there's restlessness. Even a very subtle degree of agitation can remain in those who are capable of rebirth into these higher realms. And then the last fetter, which is at the root, at the whole cycle of birth and death, is avijja, or ignorance, which means not knowing the way things really are. Yes, please.
Could you explain the difference between conceit and personality?
Yeah, basically, with personality view or identity view is the view of a self as a concrete reality, and it's through forming a view, one attempts to set that idea of self in relation, to give it some kind of substance or identity by identifying the self either with one or another of the 5 aggregates, or else putting it in relationship to the 5 aggregates. The self as either form, feeling, perception, mental activities, or consciousness, or else the self as that which possesses them, or the self is within them, or the self is outside of them. So one is giving some kind of content to the idea of self, whereas the conceit, I am, is what underlies identity view, but it's just the idea that I am something real. But it hasn't yet reached the point of trying to fill in the content of that idea of what I am. So the conceit I am, we could say, is the idea I am something, and then when one tries to figure out what is that something, then one sets it in relation to the five aggregates, and then one fills in the something with some kind of content, and then that becomes the identity view. Yeah.
If the thinking of I am just aggregate of five aggregate and is impermanent, subject to suffering, is that a conceit?
No, that would be still a view of self. I think that would be probably like a materialist view of self, or at least the view that I am. Well, actually, there are many ways you could formulate that kind of identity view. If one takes the view to be I am the five aggregates, but at death the five aggregates come to an end completely and there's no continuity beyond death, then it's a materialist identity view. If one holds that I am the five aggregates, but maybe the consciousness aggregate survives death and goes on as the self-same entity, then it becomes an eternalist view. Anyway, that's a big topic. We could take some other time. Okay, so now, and we also have to remember the main point which the Buddha made in the first part of the sutta, the important point, is that the fetters don't exist only when they become active in the mind. But the Buddha says that the fetter also includes the underlying tendency to that fetter. So even though a particular mental state that we call the fetter isn't active on a particular occasion, but as long as there is that possibility, the potential for that afflictive mental state to arise, then one says that the fetter is still present in the person. So the Buddha used the example of the little baby lying on its back, who doesn't even have any idea of personal identity. Yet you can't say that he's free from identity view. He doesn't even have exposure to teachings, yet he still has doubt, and so on. Okay, now we'll come to the new part of the sutta, the second part, which begins at the top of page 539. So now the Buddha is going to teach the way to abandoning the five lower fetters. And so he says, there is a path, Ananda, there is a way to the abandoning of the five lower fetters. That anyone, without relying on that path or that way, should know or see or abandon the five lower fetters. This is not possible. And then he uses a simile. He says, just as when there's a great tree standing possessed of heartwood, it's not possible that anyone could cut out its heartwood without cutting through its bark and sapwood. So too there is this path. Then comes the converse. There is a path, Ananda, a way to the abandoning of the five lower fetters, that someone, by relying on that path or way, shall know and see and abandon the five lower fetters. This is possible. Again, the simile, just as when there is a great tree standing possessed of heartwood, it is possible that someone shall cut out its heartwood by cutting through its bark and sapwood. So too there is a path, and so on, to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. Okay, so this is pretty much laying down that what the Buddha is going to present is the essential and necessary path for eradicating the 5 lower fetters. Okay, then he gives another simile to show the quality, the kind of intention or quality that is needed to eradicate the 5 lower fetters. He says, suppose the river Ganges were full of water right up to the brim so that crows could drink from it, and then a feeble man came along thinking, by swimming across the stream with my arms I shall get safely across to the further shore of this river, yet he would not be able to get safely across. Okay, so too, when the Dhamma is being taught to someone for the cessation of personality. I'm not so sure that I like this rendering anymore. Because, we always think that we have some personality, and we think to eliminate personality, you just become a very dull, boring, uninteresting person. But it really means for the cessation of this continuous process of arising and passing of the 5 aggregates that constitutes our identity within samsara, or you might say for the cessation of samsaric existence. In other words, for the attainment of nibbana, or liberation. If his mind does not enter into it, enter into it with interest and acquire confidence or trust in it, steadiness and resolution, then he can be regarded as like the feeble man. Okay, then comes the simile of the river again, and the man comes along who wants to get across. And then so too, when the Dhamma is being taught to someone for the cessation of, you could say, conditioned existence or samsaric existence, if his mind enters into it, with keen interest and desire, and he acquires confidence, steadiness, and resolution, then he can be regarded as like the strong man. Okay, so the qualities needed to break the 5 fetters and to the qualities needed to break the 5 fetters is having a keen interest, an interest in or keen desire for the cessation of individual identity, personal identity, or samsaric becoming, and then having confidence or trust, that is clarity about it, then being steady, that is being persistent, making a strong effort, and resolution, having strong determination to reach the goal. And so the fitting simile for a person with these qualities is the strong man who is ready to cross the wide river Ganges just with the strength of his own arms. Okay, so now that is sort of a way of building up to the climax. Now comes the actual presentation of the way to abandoning the 5 letters. Okay, here, with seclusion from the acquisitions or possessions. And what's meant here, well, we have an important word here, upadhi. It's a word that's it's translated as acquisitions, but any kind of translation into English, I think, can't really capture the full flavor of the original word. The prefix upa usually suggests towards oneself, and di is from the verb dadati, which means to put down or to place. So that which one takes and places near oneself. So you might even translate it, I've tried experimenting with assets, though it didn't work out in all contexts. But here it seems to work well. The things that one takes up and brings to oneself, maybe even appropriations would be good, and then claims possession over them. So we could say that attachment is the internal or psychological aspect of upati, and then the things that one becomes attached to is the objective aspect. And so we have this subjective play, or this play of the subjective attachment, reaching out, grasping things, that's upadana, and taking them to oneself, and then they become one's upati, one's acquisitions or possessions. So sometimes they're identified with material possessions, sometimes with the five aggregates. And so this seems to be saying that to reach the abandoning of the five lower fetters, one has to begin with some degree of renunciation. Perhaps not entirely an outward renunciation, but there should be a kind of inward renunciation of this acquisitiveness. Okay, then comes with the abandoning of unwholesome states, with the complete tranquilization of bodily inertia. It seems to me that I'm not so sure that inertia is really a good rendering. I take this to be bodily disturbance. You know, when one first sits down to meditate, there's a certain, before the mind really settles in, there's a certain agitation in the body, a little bit of maybe bodily restlessness, the coarse feelings in the body. And then as one continues with the practice, this sort of settles down, the body settles down, becomes still, becomes fixed. So that is the tranquilization of bodily inertia. Okay, so all of this is building up to the first jhana. And now comes the usual formula for the first jhana. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures, secluded from unwholesome states, mental states, a bhikkhu enters and abides in the first jhana, which is accompanied by applied and sustained thought with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Okay, the jhanas, we've gone through them several times before, but just to review, the jhanas are states of deep samadhi, deep concentration, in which the mind becomes collected immovably or unshakably upon a single object. And to promote the attainment of the jhana, there are 5 mental factors which become prominent. 4 of them are mentioned here. One is applied thought. This is vitakka, the mental factor of applying the mind to the object. The second is vichara, translated as sustained thought, and that is the mental factor which keeps the mind, moving on the object, or which keeps the mind focused on the object. I now translate it as examination, but it's examining the object not for the purpose of insight, but just sort of to keep the mind fixated on the object. Okay, then as one continues, even like when we're doing our regular meditation, when we're breathing in, being aware of breathing in, it's vitakka, applied thought that applies the mind to the breath as it's coming in and going out. And it's vichara, which is examining the breath coming in and going out. And so we have vitakka, vichara, applied thought and sustained thought working together. And as through the work of applied and sustained thought, one is able to keep the mind more consistently on the object as the stream of thoughts begins to settle down, as the different obstructive mental states clear away, then there arises rapture, or a kind of joyous exhilaration, which can increase in intensity to even to the stage of bliss or rapture. And then there comes a very subtle, beautiful feeling of pleasure, inner pleasant sensation. And this is described here as rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. That as the mind has become secluded or detached from sensual pleasures and from unwholesome mental states. And so it enters and it dwells in the first jhana. So the meditator described here achieves the first jhana, then he has to go on to exercise mastery over the jhana. So before going on to the next stage of practice, he has to enter the jhana time and time again, becoming familiar with it, being able to enter it quite quickly on the spot, being able to remain in it for longer periods of time, being able to emerge from it quite naturally and quickly without disorientation. Okay, once he achieves that mastery over the jhana, and now we're coming in, I have to say as a kind of preamble, that we're coming into quite high stages of practice. So if you try to correlate this with your own experience and think, have I reached this level yet? Have I reached that level yet? No, I haven't. Don't think, oh, I'm a failure. I haven't, no chance of success. Because this is a gradual, step-by-step path. And now the Buddha is describing here the practice that's being undertaken by one who has really built up very strong spiritual faculties and is ready for the final breakthrough. So maybe this is like giving us, even if we haven't been to India or China, you could look at a map of India or China and you could plan maybe your next vacation to one of those countries. But don't think that, first don't think that because I haven't been to India or China, I'm a failure. And also don't think that it's impossible for me to get to India or China. If you go there and if you prepare well in advance by checking your map, getting a tour book, finding the interesting places to visit, then when you get to China or India, you'll know your way around. Okay, so now, after the meditator has entered and mastered the first jhana, now he's going to move to the development of insight. This will be the practice of vipassana, based on and directed to the jhana. So the text says, whatever exists there of material form, feeling, perception, formations or volitional activities, and consciousness, he sees those states. Okay, I just want to pause here. Okay, so now what the meditator has done after attaining and mastering the jhana, he emerges from the jhana And his mind is now very powerful, very clear. It's like a bright searchlight. And he's able to turn that bright searchlight-like mind upon the jhanic experience. And instead of just grasping the jhanic experience, becoming attached to it and delighting in it, he dissects the jhana into its constituents or components. He sees the jhana as, we can say, a constellation or an aggregation made up of these 5 aggregates. Also, in the jhana, just like in any experience, there are the 5 aggregates. So he dissects the jhana into these 5 factors. There is material form, beginning with the physical body, which is the basis of practice, but especially the jhana usually takes as its object some kind of subtle form, like a visualized light or circle of light. Then there is the feeling, which in the first jhana is this feeling of pleasure. There is the perception of the object of the jhana. There are the volitional activities, all the volitional states involved in keeping the mind on the object of jhana. And then there is the consciousness, the awareness of the object. So he sees the experience now in terms of the 5 aggregates. He brings the 5 aggregates into focus as the basic constituents of the jhanic experience. It's a little bit like if I take this piece of paper, say, it looks like a solid white sheet, but if I put it under a very high, very powerful microscope, then I will be able to see maybe the cells of the cellulose. Or maybe it's like, let's take an easier example, taking a leaf. A leaf looks like a solid green object, but if you put it under a very powerful microscope and look through it, then you see that the leaf is made up of many, many cells, and each cell has a number of constituents, the cell wall, the cytoplasm, the living matter, the nucleus of the cell, various, anybody know biology better than me? Other parts of the cell. Okay, so he's using this high-power microscope of the jhanic mind, the mind which has been trained through the jhana, to examine the experience of jhana sort of reflectively, and sees it as constituted by the 5 aggregates. And now he's going to examine those 5 aggregates in terms of the 3 characteristics, which are now expanded into a list of, I think there's 11 items here. He sees those states, those factors, those dharmas, as being impermanent, as dukkha, suffering, again, that's not so satisfactory. Maybe you could say it's defective, deficient, inadequate. As a disease, a tumor, a barb, a calamity, an affliction, as alien, as disintegrating, as sunya, which here is empty or void, as not self. So here we have 11 characteristics which are ascribed to the 5 aggregates. So many of them are just elaborations of dukkha, of suffering. So we have disease, tumor, barb, calamity, affliction. Those are in a way just bringing out the different aspects of dukkha. And we have to realize, these very powerful statements And for an untrained mind, the jhana, it's extremely blissful and delightful experience. But if one regards it as blissful and delightful, then there will come in a subtle attachment to it. And when there's a subtle attachment to the jhana and that attachment is not eliminated, what does it serve as a condition for? I have to speak more loudly. It's an attachment, but it's not a lower fetter. What you're close. What does it become? Exactly. It's rupa raga, or attachment to form. And it becomes a cause for rebirth into the form realm. And so the Buddha is using strong language here, probably because, that bliss of the jhana is so exhilarating, so delightful, that he has to use that strong language in order to cut away at the subtle attachment to it. And then the words used here, alien or parato, means as other than oneself, as void, as not self. Those are different aspects of anatta, of non-self. And disintegrating is another aspect of which of the three main characteristics? Impermanence. Exactly, impermanence. So we have here these 11 characteristics. It's just an expansion of the three characteristics. Okay, so this contemplation of the five aggregates in terms of these 11 features serves to induce a kind of inner turning away from the five aggregates, or from this jhanic experience. And so as the meditator's insight into the aggregates deepens, then he turns away from them and he directs his mind towards what is called the amata dhatu, very beautiful expression, which is the deathless element. Okay, so first he directs the mind towards the deathless element as a kind of aspiration, kind of yearning or aspiration to reach the deathless, to reach liberation. And he does so by reflecting, this is the peaceful, this is the sublime, that is the stilling of all formations, the relinquishing of all, I see something was not yet corrected. It should be the relinquishing of all acquisitions. That's better. Sabupati patini sago. The destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. So first he brings nibbana into range through reflection and through aspiration. But as the insight goes deeper and the aspiration becomes stronger, then the mind actually turns away from all of the conditioned phenomena of the five aggregates and brings nibbana itself into focus. So the mind, in a sense you could say, launches out upon nibbana, or it hits nibbana as its object of realization. And when this happens, the text goes on, if he is steady in that, if he is firm and steady in that, and his faculties are strong and powerful enough, then right on the spot he attains the destruction of the taints, that is, the destruction of the asavas, of the deep primordial drives that keep one tied to samsara. So that means if he's steady in that, he'll achieve arhatship, complete liberation from birth and death. But if he does not attain the destruction of the taints, because he still has some kind of subtle desire for the Dhamma or delight in the Dhamma, then he can still go on and destroy the 5 lower fetters. Then he doesn't achieve complete liberation, but he becomes one due to take rebirth spontaneously in what are called the pure abodes, and there attain final nibbana without ever returning from that world. Okay, let me just finish. Okay, so one who eradicates just the 5 lower fetters, but still has the 5 higher fetters, is, we use the Pali word, anagami, which means a non-returner. Okay, so this disciple, the anagami, is somebody who is bound for liberation. He'll never come back to the sensuous realm of existence, but he'll take rebirth, usually in the pure abodes, which are in the realm of form, of subtle form. And then, within that realm of form, he'll reach final nirvana, final liberation. Okay, so this is said to be the path and way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. Okay.
What's meant by Dhamma here?
Yeah, okay, that's an interesting question. And I have to say, the text itself is not really explicit about it. The commentary identifies this with, it says, an attachment to jhana and insight, or to serenity and insight. I think that's what it says.
So is it kind of a mental formation?
Well, first off, let me just check the note here. Which refers me to 553. Yeah, the commentary says, these 2 terms signify desire and attachment with respect to serenity and insight. If one is able to discard all desire and attachment concerning serenity and insight, one becomes an arhat. If one cannot discard them, one becomes a non-returner and is reborn in the pure abodes. That's the way the commentary explains it. Sometimes I'm not sure if the commentary is right. It could be I just don't know. But it could be just somebody has some desire and attachment, even to that state itself, to the state of maybe of becoming an arhat. And so if there's some subtle desire or attachment to that, with the idea, I will be an arhat, I will be enlightened, that becomes the hindrance. Yeah, those are called dhammas, but I'm not sure that would be intended here. It could be either attachment to the practice, which is what the commentary says, or it could be some attachment or yearning, a kind of self-centered yearning for the goal. There's no explanation of this word, to my knowledge, within the sutta itself. Anybody else have any questions at this point? Okay, Edwin? If there's that mobile microphone, it would be good to pass that around. Yeah, please.
Insight meditation, say first jhana, say, because I know I have.
Yeah, I think I'm going to need some. Is it not working?
It's a smaller one.
A smaller one. There was one over here, no? Okay, maybe just speak loudly.
I've been explained this a few times, and I've been confused since I have practiced insight meditation.
Yeah.
I've seen people that have yet experienced the first jhana.
Yeah.
And I was told that yes, you can practice insight meditation. But say, in this case here, it shows that if you go into the first jhana, it can be ruptured and actually get, actually I would say that we're stuck into the first jhana. Because you're experiencing, a sublime bliss. But would you start the Vipassana or Vipassani at the first jhana experience, or would you just say it could be any way before? I mean, my question is, when do you start?
Okay, I understand. Let me just repeat the question for the camera. The question is, basically, to simplify it, whether it's necessary to achieve jhana before beginning to practice vipassana, or whether one could start directly by practicing vipassana. Is that the point of the question? Okay, the way I understand it, there are different approaches to practice which are suited for different people. And so one approach is to begin with what we call samadhi meditation, serenity meditation, which is intended to promote attainment of the jhana, and then on the basis of the jhana, one goes on to develop insight. The other approach begins with vipassana meditation. It doesn't really begin with vipassana itself. Vipassana means insight, but vipassana meditation is a kind of meditation which is intended to promote the arising of insight without necessarily depending upon the base of jhana.
I was told that before by the teacher, but I was thinking that you would have to experience the first, second, third, fourth jhana in order to actually, experience greater experience the insight meditation, or that doesn't matter. You're saying go either way.
To develop insight meditation, in my understanding, it's not necessary to have prior attainment of the jhana. Now, this sutta is intended to show the way for the eradication of the 5 lower fetters. And so it seems to me that the Buddha is bringing in jhana here because the jhana will serve as a base for eradicating the 5 fetters all at one stroke. So it's when the meditator has both jhana and vipassana and insight, that he can, in one stroke, either go directly to arhatship, or if he doesn't reach arhatship in this one stroke, then he'll come out as a non-returner. But for people like us who are still in preparatory stages of training, then one finds whichever method works best for oneself. But what's certainly true is that to gain liberation, vipassana has to come into the practice, whether at the beginning, starting from the direct insight approach, or else developing jhana first, and then bringing in insight. David?
Yes. This seems to be focused on altering one's rebirth in some ways. Gaining sight or becoming free of these fetters so that one is possible to gain. Now, that's a focus on something in the future.
Yeah.
But what about what's going on at the moment with that individual? What benefit is it now as opposed to somewhere down? Do you understand the question I'm asking?
I think I understand. Well, certainly this individual who's practicing in this way will be experiencing a lot of personal benefits here and now. Since this person is able to enter the first jhana, it means he has access to this very happy and blissful state. And it means that his mind is free, I mean not permanently, but at least temporarily, he's free from the 5 hindrances of sensual craving, ill will, dullness and drowsiness, restlessness, doubt, and he'll have a keen insight, be able to examine the nature of things very keenly and sharply.
Right. But the focus, when you're talking about it, is not necessarily you, is on rebirth, moving into a different realm, not so much on the benefits of the present moment.
Well, you see, the Buddha presents his teaching in different ways for different people. And so for those who are focused more on the here and now, then he'll give teachings which are more beneficial to them in their day-to-day life here and now. But this is the teaching which is given for those who are aiming to go to the far shore. And it's not so much aimed at a better rebirth, but this is the teaching for breaking free from the cycle of rebirth, the cycle of birth and death. And so even though for one who doesn't reach full liberation, they will get the better rebirth by being reborn in the pure abodes. But if one is practicing in this way and one doesn't even become a non-returner, but one will still get a better rebirth and have greater happiness and peace here and now. Yeah.
When he emerges from the jhana and contemplates the 5 aggregates,
Yeah.
does he contemplate the 5 aggregates in the jhana that are already passed?
That's an interesting question. Okay, so the question is, I said that the meditator emerges from the jhana and then contemplates the 5 aggregates. And so the question is he contemplating the aggregates of the first jhana, which maybe logically it wouldn't be possible because he's come out from the jhana, or is he contemplating the 5 aggregates within his present experience? I have to say, the way I read the text, it's saying that he's contemplating the aggregates that existed within the jhana. Even though those aggregates don't presently exist, but he's able to, he knows the experience of the jhana, and so he's able to reflect back upon them, and then retrospectively examine the factors that existed within that jhana. Because it says, whatever exists therein. I don't have the Pali text in front of me. I think it's Yad Ati Tatta, Yad Ati Tatta, Rupagatam, Vedanagatam, Sanyagatam, Sankaragatam, Vijnanagatam. Yeah, that is so. And this is, I should say that there's difference of opinion between people, whether one emerges from the jhana in order to contemplate it with insight, or whether one actually contemplates it with insight while one is still in the jhana. The commentarial tradition, which I follow on this point, says that one emerges from the jhana. Because I just don't know it, especially as one gets to the higher jhanas, after the first jhana, vitaka and vichara, thought and examination, are eliminated. And so how could one then contemplate the factors of the jhana as being impermanent, dukkha, a disease, tumor, barb, and so on, if there's no thought or examination occurring. That seems problematic to me. So I take it that one emerges from the jhana and then retrospectively examines those factors as they existed within the jhana. Okay, was there any other question? Let me just quickly look at the questions that came from the internet. Okay, what is the Pali for personality and does it differ from identity? The Pali word is Sakaya, and the word used to be rendered personality. I don't know who started that, and I follow that here. But I think it's not a satisfactory rendering because personality usually means something like your character, whether he has an outgoing personality, an introspective personality, a gloomy personality, a cheerful personality. But that's not what's meant by Sakaya. Sakaya means the 5 aggregates connected with attachment. What is the relation between the 10 fetters and dependent origination? Too complex, we don't have enough time. Why do you think I didn't mention the 5th jhana factor, which is samadhi, or one-pointedness of mind, concentration. He asked, why is that omitted here? I think it's implied by the word jhana. Sometimes some questions too complicated to answer. What does amata dhatu mean literally? Literally it means deathless element. And how does it differ from nibbana? It doesn't differ from nibbana. It is a synonym for nibbana. That's why it says he fixes his mind on, where he directs his mind towards the deathless element, and the way he considers the deathless element is under different synonyms for nibbana. The stilling of all conditioned things, or formations, the relinquishing of all attachments, the destruction of craving, dispassion, cessation, nibbana. Okay. Any more questions? I don't want to omit. You have to speak more loudly. The 5, what are the 5 higher fetters? Okay. The desire for the form realm, desire for the formless realm, conceit, this is the subtle conceit, I am, restlessness, and ignorance. Okay, the rest of the sutta now continues. It goes through each of the other 4 jhana attainments, or it goes through the remaining 3 jhana attainments. It just, in the text, the formula is abridged, and it applies the same process of contemplation to those attainments. Then it comes to the 4 it's the lower 3 formless meditations. First comes the base of infinite space. And now notice here the contemplation. Whatever exists therein of feeling, perception, formations, and consciousness, he sees those states as impermanent, as not self. So what is missing here? Exactly. So it's material form that's missing. And it's not a typographical error or an editing error. But in the formless meditation, Of course, the body, the physical body of the meditator is still present, but what the meditator is experiencing, in the meditator's actual experience, there's no form. He's just experiencing the infinity of space. And so when he does the contemplation, form is not included. Okay, then he moves on to the base of infinite consciousness. Again, the same contemplation. Then he comes to the base of, it's called the base of nothingness. Again, these are very high states of samadhi meditation. These are not states in themselves of insight, but these are different stages in the collecting of the mind, in the increasing intensity of mental unification, whereby the object is becoming subtler and subtler and subtler, till you would say that consciousness is reaching a point where it's on the very pinnacle of conscious awareness. And so, having attained and mastered the base of nothingness, again he applies the same process of contemplation. Again here, material form is omitted, because in the base of nothingness there's no form, but they're still present in the experience, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. And then the rest of the paragraph just repeats the same process of contemplation. And so then the Buddha concludes, this is the path, the way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters. And then remember he's speaking to Ananda. So 16, paragraph 16, Venerable Ananda asks a question. He says, Bhante, if this is the path and way to the abandoning of the 5 lower fetters, then how is it that some monks here are said to gain deliverance of mind, and some are said to gain deliverance by wisdom? And then the Buddha says, the difference, Ananda, is in their faculties, their spiritual faculties. And so the text uses 2 words here, which are usually, it's a little puzzling to me, usually these 2 are joined in the description of arhatship. Arhatship is called jointly the deliverance or liberation of mind and deliverance or liberation by wisdom. Yet here, a distinction is being made between those who gain deliverance of mind and those who gain deliverance by wisdom. The commentary gives an explanation which, again, I'm not sure that I find it completely convincing. If you want to turn to see what the commentary says, it's on page 1268. It says, among those who proceed by way of serenity, one monk emphasizes unification of mind. He is said to gain deliverance of mind. Another emphasizes wisdom. He is said to gain deliverance by wisdom.
I understand the difference here, but I don't see what you gain. One is the mind, and the other one is the mental forms, the fetters.
I can't hear so well.
So what will say,
We had 2 microphones at the beginning. The other one wasn't working?
okay, the levels of mind and the levels of wisdom, what would be the difference there? I mean, that you gain?
I'm not really clear about the meaning of this. I would think that Ananda is speaking about a distinction between 2 types of arhats. One called one who gains deliverance of mind, and another one who calls deliverance by wisdom. Now, other texts there are some texts which make a distinction between two types of arhats. One is called liberated in both ways. The other is called liberated by wisdom. Now, the one who is liberated in both ways is a meditator who gains the formless meditations, the formless samadhis, and also achieves arhatship. So, through the power of samadhi, by gaining the formless meditations, he's liberated in mind. And through the power of wisdom, which eradicates the defilements, he's liberated by wisdom. Okay, that's one type of arhat, liberated in both ways, in both respects. The other type is called liberated by wisdom. And this is the meditator who doesn't gain the formless meditations, but still gains liberation through the power of wisdom. He can have the jhanas, but not the formless meditations. And so he eradicates all defilements through wisdom, and he becomes liberated by wisdom. And so that's the usual distinction. Liberated in both ways.
It's like two formulas, but they both get to the same path. It's like two formulas, but they both lead to the same path. Yeah. But this is very unusual. I think this is the only place in the suttas that I know of where a distinction is made between those who are said to gain liberation of mind and those who gain liberation by wisdom. So I'm not sure of the meaning.
What's in this commentary, what's meant by emphasizes unification of mind? What is unification?
Unification of mind is probably citta ekagata, one-pointedness of mind. And that means basically samadhi or serenity. And maybe that's actually the meaning of, maybe the commentary is right here. So one who puts more emphasis on gaining samadhi, concentration, will be the one liberated in mind, and the one who places more emphasis on wisdom will be one who gains liberation by wisdom.
That makes sense, yeah.
Please. By
emphasizing wisdom,
yeah.
can they again superpower?
Can we what?
Can they gain superpower? Superpower.
Supernatural power.
Yeah. What is the question?
Can they gain supernatural power?
Those who
liberated by wisdom.
By wisdom. I think, yeah, they can. Because the basis for developing the superpowers, like the United States, China, or Russia, the basis for gaining the superpowers is said to be the fourth jhana. And so somebody who gains the fourth jhana, but not the formless meditations, is still liberated by wisdom. But a person with the fourth jhana can gain the superpowers. And I think even without the fourth jhana, some people even by gaining lower jhanas, or some people even without jhana at all can gain some of the superpowers. But to gain real mastery over them, I think it requires the fourth jhana. But if you want to get them, I could sell them to you cheap.
By wisdom, I assume you mean right view, right thoughts, which you kind of obtain through vipassana meditation. Just focusing on that.
Yeah, but this is actually panya. So right view can mean just like conceptual right understanding. But this is the wisdom involved in this liberation by wisdom is actual, penetrative insight. Or maybe we could say realization. Okay, were there any questions from the internet? Excuse me? this is a little technical question. Do the steps to liberation in MN 64 apply to both types of followers, the Dhamma follower and the faith follower? I have to say the sutta is not explicit about that. Yeah, I mean, I would say so, yeah. I don't want to go into explanation, these are technical issues. Okay, I think we will end here. I had handed out, out of curiosity, I had looked at, in the Chinese agamas, there's a counterpart to the sutta. And I had looked at that sutta, which occurs in the Chinese counterpart of the Majjhima Nikāya. And then I translated the portion that corresponds to the second half of this sutta, thinking it would make some interesting points. There were some interesting points of comparison. I thought I would have enough time to go through some of the differences, but time is running out. But the pages have been printed out and handed out, so all of you can take them and look at them at your leisure. But I just wanted to point out where I found some interesting differences, just very briefly. On the bottom of the first page, we have the simile of using the raft to cross the river. This we don't find in the Pali version of this sutta, but we find it in Majjhima Nikāya, Sutta number 22, paragraph 13, which is on page 228 of this book. Then on page 2, in about the middle, where we have the more detailed treatment of the base of nothingness, we find that kind of contemplation as impermanent, as arising and passing away, by way of dispassion, cessation, abandoning, and relinquishment, and so on. This corresponds to Majjhima Nikāya, Sutta number 37, section 3, on page 334. Then the third paragraph from the end, Ananda's last question to the Buddha. His last question to the Buddha, or his statement about it, that it's wonderful how a monk depends on one support or another to cross over the taints. This corresponds to Majjhima Nikāya 106, paragraph 13, page 873 of the translation. And then his last question, why is it that not all monks quickly reach the unsurpassed ultimate extinction of the taints? This seems to correspond to Sutta 106, section 10, page 872. So those of you who are interested in examining sort of the differences between different textual versions of a text can look this over at your leisure. Okay, we'll end now with the sharing of the merits. So we share the merits with the devas, the fear spirits, the dragon spirits, asking them to rejoice in the merits and protect the Dharma, protect the world, protect ourselves and others. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantam anumoditva chiram rakantu sasanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantam anumoditva chiram rakantu desanam. Akasata chabumata deva naga mahidika punyantam anumoditva chiram rakantu mam param. Etavata cham hehi sampadam punya sampadam sabbe devanumodantu, sabba sampatti siddhya, sabbe buddhanumodantu, sabba sampatti siddhya, sabbe sadanumodantu, sabba sampatti siddhya, bhavagupadaya vichetato, etantare satakayupapanna, rupya rupicha sanya sanino, dukkha pamuchantu, pusantu nibbutting. Okay, we will break now, and then after lunch, coming back, say about 12 o'clock, maybe 10 after 12, we'll have a little discussion period. So if you have any other questions based on the sutta, bring them up for discussion then. And then I won't be having a class next Saturday, but we'll have the class the Saturday after that, the 28th, and then I'll have a class the Saturday after that, I think it's February 4th. Do you have a calendar? And so we'll do Majjhima Nikāya Sutta number 66 over the next, on the 28th and February 4th.
Will you announce what the meetings for that will be?
Yeah, I said it's Majjhima Nikāya Sutta number 66. It's called the Simile of the Quail. I said February 4th.
Yeah, number 66 is what day? 28?
Excuse me?
On the 28th, you have Sutta number 66.
What suttas are you studying on those days?
Oh, number 66 will probably take 2 sessions.
Okay, good.
Okay, so we do the stand up and we do 3 bows. Okay. Johnny? This one is giving the low mic signal, the low battery signal, battery low signal.